How you doing, everybody? I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our discussion, or hurricane discussion, of course, for today, Monday, October 30th, 2023. Almost forgot what month we were in, but we're in October, almost in November, though. Halloween tomorrow, so we're getting there, and we're also getting closer towards the end of the hurricane season. But obviously, as you can tell by the title card, that does not mean development is stopping in the Atlantic. We're watching some potential late season development to occur in the Caribbean, and I'll show you it's definitely favorable in terms of atmosphere and sea surface temperature wise, and also more eastern Pacific development. We have Tropical Storm Pilar out there, and it is also bringing some tropical storm watches to the coast of Central America. All a lot of stuff to go over today. Glad to have you along. And without further ado, let's get started. We have a lot to go over today, of course, with the NHC homepage. First of all, Invest 96L. This looked like this was going to have a chance to develop. It did actually end up becoming a high chance several days ago. I don't remember how long it's been since it was a high chance, but it's kind of downgraded since then, and we're now only at a 10% chance of this developing into any sort of system. NHC is mentioning that there's strong upper level winds and dry air, and it is decreasing the chances of any sort of short-lived tropical storm occurring with this, but it is expected to move slowly northwestward today and then turn northward and northeastward on Tuesday and Wednesday, and will probably be not much of a threat at all for the United States anyways. Different story though for this little system. In the Eastern Caribbean, this might actually be something of a threat to watch. Not really for the United States, at least as it seems for right now, but it might be something to watch for development in the Caribbean. This is at a 60% chance. No invest tagged on this storm yet, or at least not the last time I checked. But of course, we might see it invest, probably will, definitely for sure, in the next few days. And this has a 60% chance of development, and NHC does note that conditions do appear conducive for gradual development. And they also do mention, and you know that this definitely has a chance when they mention that this potentially could be a tropical depression at some point in the forecast period. For this case, it will be later this week when the system reaches the central or southwestern Caribbean. So this might be something, if this does develop, of course, to watch for Central America. So we might have to keep tabs on there. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Pacific, there is activity going on as well. There's a 20% chance. This is Invest 93E. And this is far from the Mexican coastline, far from any sort of coastline, and this only has a 20% chance of development, and it doesn't really seem like it's not going to do much of anything. But on the other hand, we have Pilar, which is a tropical storm formed not long ago, only a few days ago, I believe, and it is at 50 miles an hour with a pressure of 1,000 millibars, and that's actually where we're going to start there. Today, of course, we have Tropical Storm Pilar. This is the NHC cone. Tropical storm watches right now in effect for El Salvador and the west coast of Nicaragua. So there's definitely some sort of impacts to be felt with this. Not anything significant. We'll go over the key messages shortly, though, but it's expected, at least for right now, that this will probably stay a tropical storm within its duration, at least for the next 5 days. And actually, really quickly, I'm going to try to check to see if the NHC does expect any strengthening of this. I usually go to the forecast discussion, and they do over the next 36 hours expect it to potentially reach 70 miles an hour, but afterwards they weaken it and kind of stall it out in terms of any sort of development in intensity. But of course, it is bottom line expected to stay a tropical storm, at least per the NHC, throughout its lifespan, at least for the next 5 days. But of course, impacts will be felt. No direct landfall expected, at least this time. We've had a lot of landfalls in the Eastern Pacific, especially over the last few weeks. We had, of course, I believe, Nora, and then, of course, we've just recently had Otis, which was very devastating for Mexico, made landfall as a Category 5. So very devastating storm there indeed. And of course, we do have impacts expected for this as well. Heavy rains from Pilar, which will produce flash flooding and urban flooding along with the potential for mudslides, as typical, especially for this region of the world where heavy rains typically do cause mudslides due to the geography. And this is expected for the Pacific coast of Central America from El Salvador southward to Costa Rica through Wednesday, and of course, hence the tropical storm watches. Tropical storm conditions are also expected as well along portions of the Pacific coast from El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, where there's a tropical storm watch in effect, and there should also watch anywhere along the Pacific coast, including Guatemala and Nicaragua, where they said that they should monitor the progress of the system. And NHC does mention potentially more additional watches, and of course another typical effect of tropical systems, especially ones as they stay offshore, there could be some swells generated along the Pacific coast of Central America. So watch out for all of these. Definitely do not minimize the impact, of course, of a tropical storm, even if it's weak, even if it's not a Category 4 or 5 hurricane that's going to near the coastline of Central America. It is still a tropical system, and therefore there will still be impacts. It really does not take one big storm, not always, to cause devastating impacts, even if not widespread, but maybe more specifically when we're talking about individuality. It only does take one storm, really, of honestly any intensity, to be a bad storm for you specifically. Whether it is maybe flooding damage, or who knows, maybe even a tree fall on your house or something from a storm. Really just takes one storm. That is the bottom line. Satellite, though, let's take a look at a satellite view of what is going on. Of course, we have the Atlantic, and we also have a view of Pilar. You could see over here kind of a disorganized system, so you could see why the NHC is not really forecasting much in strengthening and intensity. Could strengthen, though, of course, over the next 24 to 36 hours, but nothing much beyond that. And you could see that it's a very broad and disorganized system right now, so definitely not looking like anything that is in a threat for potentially rapidly intensifying or something along the lines of those natures, so nothing to worry about then. And then as we go to the Atlantic, roughly around here, this is Invest 96L, and you could obviously see it does not really look like much of anything at all. In fact, if you did not know that there was an Invest here, you would not expect that there was anything here at all. So that is definitely a sign. This is definitely something we could cross out of our list of concerns in terms of hurricane season. So 96L, don't need to worry about it. But then we also have, look down south here, just in the Eastern Caribbean. This is associated with that area of interest that the NHC mentions. And you notice there is some convection associated with it. So this definitely has some energy, some beef, as we like to say, associated with this storm. So this definitely does have a chance to develop and maybe become something that we need to watch as it does move across the Caribbean and closer towards the Western Caribbean over the next several days. As I like to do so from time to time, especially if you watch me, I kind of like to zoom out a little bit, if you will. I kind of like to zoom out because we usually focus, at least from what I do, I usually just focus on the Atlantic and sometimes the Eastern Pacific basins, of course, when there is something huge there. But obviously there is tropical cyclone activity elsewhere in the world besides just the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific. So I like to zoom out, and I like to use this website here. This is CIMSS from University of Wisconsin. It's a very great website, and I like using it a lot, not just for this, but of course for other resources, which I do sometimes use on my channel. And of course, you do notice that right now we are the only basin, including the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. Our region of the world is the only area producing any sort of activity right now. We have, of course, Invest 93E, Tropical Storm Pilar, and Invest 96L. Out of the three of them, only one right now, of course, is of any big concern, and I would expect we'll probably have another Invest over the next few days, very shortly, with the thing we have in the Eastern Caribbean right now. So with that being said, let's move on. Sea surface temperature anomalies, and I'm actually going to zoom in. I'll show you in a little bit. I'm actually going to zoom in on the Eastern Caribbean on the Caribbean region specifically to kind of show you a little bit more in terms of why to watch out potentially for this development chance we're looking at right now. But of course, why not sum up what's going on globally so far? We have, of course, ongoing our El Nino. Obviously, if you've been paying attention to our global patterns, at least for the last few months, that we're definitely in an El Nino right now, and you can see that warmer sea surface temperatures along the equatorial Pacific, and this is expected to remain with us through the winter. Could definitely be interesting, especially if you're an East Coast snow lover. I know I am. I live in New York City. And of course, we've been lacking in snow, so I'm definitely looking forward, to this winter. I mean, we need the snow. We're in the Northeast. It's not winter without snow? But of course, that is a discussion for another time. But bottom line, we have El Nino, and of course, we have the Atlantic as well, very warm, especially out here in the Eastern Atlantic off the north coast of Africa. This will be something interesting to watch and to monitor at another time, especially throughout the off season. I'm going to be, of course, posting my off-season discussions this year and, of course, for next year as well, as I always do. And this will be something we watch throughout the off-season because especially it could be interesting if this does last, if this does hold, if we generally are warm next year in the Atlantic, especially coming off of this El Nino. Of course, if this El Nino does weaken, which it probably will, don't really see, honestly, any reason that this El Nino will stick around longer next year than it's supposed to. Bottom line, it could be interesting, and we'll definitely be watching this for sure. Kind of foreshadowing a little bit, but kind of do gotta throw in a little bit of foreshadowing here and there. Bottom line, just watch, okay? Just watch this region closely, and we'll be definitely monitoring it over the next several months. Caribbean, on the other hand, and I'm actually gonna zoom in specifically on this region, the Caribbean region in general. It is very warm. You see the sea surface temperature anomalies, and this is not the sea surface temperatures themselves. That I'm actually going to show too in just a second, but really quickly, sea surface temperature anomalies, the departures from normal of the averages of the sea surface temperatures, that's basically, for lack of better words, that's basically the best that I can explain it. And all these oranges and reds are describing, basically showing visually that the departures are normal, are showing above average sea surface temperatures, of course, in the Caribbean, meaning warmer than normal sea surface temperatures, and that means, of course, more heat and more energy in the oceans, and that is definitely a lot of a fuel supply when we're talking tropical cyclone development. It's very warm in the Caribbean, and really not a lot of it's been used this year. Most of the activity we've had was in the MDR, really stayed well away from the Western Atlantic. We really did not have much Western Atlantic activity at all this year. And I guess that you could say that could be because of El Nino, and that is a pattern that we typically see in El Nino. So El Nino, I guess you could say, even though we had a very busy Atlantic this year, El Nino did come through in some sort of way, at least in terms of steering. But bottom line, that just means Atlantic has been very warm in the Caribbean. Not a lot of activity to use it up, so the energy is still very fresh. I guess you could say very ripe. So that means there's still a lot of energy in the Caribbean yet to be used for any incoming tropical system. And how does that translate in terms of sea surface temperatures, the actual temperatures along the surface of the ocean? I'm using, of course, NOAA-NESDIS. This is the sea surface temperature map, and you notice through basically the whole entire Caribbean, especially the central and southwestern Caribbean, the area that we're watching the closest for development, it is in the 30 degrees Celsius mark. You can see this by the isotherm here, basically stretching through the entire Caribbean. And 30 degrees Celsius is very warm. The usual benchmark, I guess if you want to call it that, benchmark that we like to look at for sea surface temperatures that are warm enough for tropical cyclone development is at 26. So that just really gives you an idea of how warm it is in the Caribbean. It's very warm, and that definitely makes things a whole lot more interesting, just that much more interesting, at least, if you like to say, when it comes to watching for the development of anything going on over there, especially this time of year, which is usually around the time of year where we do watch for development the most, because it's naturally where we are more favorable, at least right now, climatology speaking. And we'll actually go over that shortly. Really quickly, do want to go over global models, see what they do show. And this is the GFS, is the Global Forecast System. Our model, the model that America produces. I think this is NOAA. So this is our model. I'm kind of showcasing it right now. 850 millibar vorticity. So this is basically the spin in the atmosphere. Enough of the talking. Let's just get right to it. So I'm going to roll it out 24 hours. Watch the Eastern Caribbean. I think this is the piece of energy that is, of course, that we're watching. Does move along. Doesn't really develop much until 48 hours. Still not much development with it, though. You can kind of see with these wind bars there is some sort of strong wave trough axis. So there definitely is a lot of, or at least some, energy there in the atmosphere, but it's still not anything bona fide yet, or closed, or kind of defined yet in its signature. Not like, for instance, you would say Tropical Storm Pilar. This is what the GFS has there, and usually I think around 36, 48 hours is when it makes its closest approach to Central America. Then after that, 54 hours, you start noticing that kind of dips away to the southwest, away from the Central American coastline. And then now we're getting to hour 72, and then moving it along, hour 96. And then you notice, there it is. We do have something there. Vorticity very strong, kind of reaching the top of the charts. And you do notice very strong vorticity, very strong spin in the atmosphere around 96 hours out, developing in the central and southwestern Caribbean. And that's the signature there. That's what we're looking for when it comes to signals in terms of development. And then this is hour 120. You do notice all of these isobars here. Notice how the signature does also get kind of more circular in the model too. This is the signature that we're looking for when it comes to development. You notice these isobars kind of circular, and you also notice they also do close off as well. That represents a closed low-level circulation that the model is detecting, and that in turn definitely is probably some sort of developing tropical cyclone the GFS has at around hour 120. And then you could also see Tropical Storm Pilar out here in the Eastern Pacific, kind of dipping away from the coast of Central America, not really to be much of a threat past the next 2 days or so. By then, really no concern when it comes to Pilar there. So that's the 850 millibar vorticity for the GFS. Another thing that I do want to show you is the 200 millibar wind, and this is the, I'm gonna try to load it back first before I explain it. Okay, so this is the 200 millibar wind pattern. This is the wind pattern in the upper atmosphere, basically the atmosphere of the jet stream, and this kind of shows how the upper atmospheric pattern is for a developing tropical system. And that is also another very key factor when it comes to looking for development in a tropical system. So this is something else to also pay very much close attention to when we're talking about any sort of development of the system. And you do notice this kind of can move it out to hour 120. You do notice at hour 120 when we do have this system in the southwestern Caribbean, notice how there is this big, the term we like to describe it as is upper level anticyclone, kind of a big, almost noticing how there's air fanning away from the system. You notice that we have this kind of motion, or at least these wind bars are kind of showing they're moving away from the low pressure that we have in the southwestern Caribbean. So that means upper level ventilation moving away from the storm, meaning that the storm is able to breathe, the tropical system is able to breathe, and that also does help in reducing wind shear in the region, which would also mean reducing winds that would kind of cut across a storm, kind of sway its thunderstorms, and in turn not allow it to develop. And that is kind of the picture that we're showing here, is wind shear not going to be as much of an issue in terms of at least development in the system, and that is a plus for development. So that does mean atmospheric conditions with this storm are definitely favorable as well. And I did want to mention, as I did mention before, climatology wise, this is also the region that we typically look for. And I do like to bring up climatology from time to time because it is an important factor to think about when it comes to development as well. Of course, we will have anomalies, especially when we're talking about anomalies. Remember, a few weeks ago we had some development in the MDR, the Eastern MDR. Not like we're having that around. Not like we are having that this time around. We're seeing development more in the southwestern Caribbean, and you notice for November 1st to 10th. This is at least the historical tropical cyclone points of origin, and this goes all the way back to 1851 when we first started keeping database of systems in the Atlantic. So you better best believe that this is definitely more or less an accurate representation of development in the Atlantic. So I mean, this is definitely a useful tool to use. And you notice where most of these points are, they are just funnily enough right in the southwestern Caribbean where we are watching for development of this system. So that definitely does mean that conditions there tend to be favorable for activity to occur this time of year in this region. So best believe that something could try to get going. As I did show to you, the sea surface temperatures are very warm, definitely very favorable in atmospheric conditions as well. Do look promising in terms of at least development for this system. So it does look very interesting, and we'll definitely monitor over the next few days. Maybe things will change, and definitely, of course, monitor. Of course, hurricane season doesn't end till November 30th. Till then, things could still happen, and even we could have activity after November 30th. Obviously, that's not typically what we do see. The more comes down to climatology and that sort of aspect. But of course, even development could occur after November 30th. But bottom line, we're still in hurricane season. We still have a month left to go. So that still means watch out, be vigilant, especially in the last few years when we've had activity in the late season, even into November, that would still impact the United States. Not saying that will happen this time around, but you get what I'm saying. It's still hurricane season. It's still the time to watch. So definitely watch this very closely, and we'll see what it does. As always, we don't know exactly what will happen, of course, till it happens. And if that's not what's been proven, especially from these last few years, then I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up for this evening. If you liked what you saw, as always, I encourage you to like, subscribe, share. Kind of help build a community. We got to do that if we want to, kind of build up steam, especially when it comes to posting and really getting this information out. It's really important to develop a sort of community in order to do so. It really helps bring the communication out there. So I encourage you to do all that. Have a very safe, very wonderful rest of your evening, especially with everything that's going on in the world. You gotta stay safe out there, and I really hope all of you do. Stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to all, and we will talk again soon. Bye.